Okay, this is College Prep English for Homeschoolers at Excellence in Education in Monrovia. And let's start our screen share, which will take a moment. You have succeeded in logging into the classroom, right?
Yes.
Have you succeeded in logging into both of them?
I haven't tried that.
Okay. They should be the same login and everything. It's just that the older one is big and slow and was bogging down, so I created a new one just so we'd have something faster. But the old one has literally thousands of resources, all of which you're welcome to go and play around with. An invitation which might appeal to some homeschoolers, but to few of the traditional persuasions. Okay, if you're here in the main classroom, okay, just a second, figure out what this is all about. I think it's just a message. Okay, in the main classroom here, everybody's going to be posting in the writers forum, and if you wanted to, you could also post into the open forum. But where is it? Well, there's also a vocabulary forum down here, which I do recommend that we use. If I can find it.
On the top left, it says the forum thing. That's what I usually use.
Oh, okay. A lot of different ways to get the things, but I believe they're all in the main sequence here somewhere. Which are writings.
Vocabulary journal there.
Yep, there it is. Vocabulary journals. Okay. There is where you'll find a lot of material. Have I taken you through that as well? Okay.
Yeah.
Because it's really my hope that you will. In fact, it's fairly certainty that you will encounter a number of new words every week, and it's my hope that you will post them with the definitions, or if you can't find the definitions, ask for help and I'll help you with it, so that you can learn it and everybody else in the class can learn the new words. And I'm sure you've seen my rather recondite listing there, which is not necessarily of a great deal of value, but it shows you basically what can be done. And I think it's just so important, especially with homeschooling, that the teacher, the parent, whoever, is doing things along with everybody else. Otherwise, where's the role model? So let's look at the writers forum. This is the writers forum. I've already got it open. And you can see the listing. The listing is going to be sorted according to the last posting. So when somebody does a reply, it sends it to the top of the list. And the way you add something is simply by clicking this one right here. And if you have any kind of a script blocker running on your machine, it can cause some problems. If you have a script blocker, all of this stuff is JavaScript, and it gives you a really very sophisticated WYSIWYG editor. I like this editor better than the one in WordPress. It's really superb. Unfortunately, it's not clear to me that Moodle is going to last through the year for various reasons. And WordPress has some other problems, but notice what it's got here. It's got all of the different fonts you can use and the sizes and the various additions and decorations to things, left centering and right and by justification, lists and block. You see what everything is, and here are the links. The undo link doesn't work very well. It sort of undoes all of the links in your entire document. Not a smart arrangement. Let's see, this is for putting pictures in. I use that all the time, as you've probably noticed, in the agendas and the notes and so forth, and special characters and all this super stuff. This one here, of course, for those of you who are actual programmers, as Kyle and Connor are, it allows you to go in and actually twiddle with the HTML code right behind everything else. Are you a programmer?
Not really.
Okay. Well, it gives you a lot of powerful features. Unfortunately, Moodle thinks it's smarter than it is. And so if I put in a picture, for example, I can try to con it into letting me put the picture in differently. Normally, you put the picture in and you give it its default sizing, or at least it accepts the default sizing. I like instead to tell it to use width 35% and don't specify the height at all. Trouble is, if I do that, if it renders it, it immediately calculates it and hard codes the number in. I don't want it to do that. But if I go in there and edit it this way, and then put that in, and then hit the save button without allowing it to render it, it'll keep it. And this means that after it appears on the screen, that picture will be 35% of the width of whatever screen it happens to be appearing in. If it's a little screen, it's a little tiny thing. It's a big screen, it blows it up. It makes it proportional, which of course is something that you'd like to do since you don't know what kind of screen is going to be used to render your material. And this is utterly irrelevant for our purposes in the class, isn't it? But anyway, this is how you do it. Once you type your material here or paste it in. Now, if you paste it from Word, sometimes it has a little trouble. Notice that there is a button up here called Clean Word HTML. It doesn't really work particularly well, but theoretically, Word is full of all kinds of horrible stuff internally. But usually it pastes fairly decently. And then once you've pasted it in, you go ahead and hit the post to form. Okay. And then it will give you only, I think, 1 minute to go back and change it again if you want to. I've got it set to 1 minute just so that I don't have to wait for 30 seconds if I want to send it out. These will be sent out eventually. It's actually this tag right here, this one here. If I click on that, it will go in and send out all of the messages that are pending. I just assume you didn't do that, but if you need to send it out right away for some reason, you can go ahead and hit that. Trouble is, if I'm editing something and going back in and editing it again and back in and editing again, I don't want somebody to send it out before I'm done with it. You see what I mean? Okay, does that answer your question?
That's a little better, yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. It's a standard sort of forum software, but it's more sophisticated than most forums.
Yeah,
it gives you more in the way of graphics and so forth. Okay, we have some writing and some debate topics that have been submitted, but the people who've submitted them are not here today because it's Chinese New Year. So we would go off in whatever direction you folks would like to go in. If you don't have any ideas, I'm sure I can find some, but let's see what you'd specifically like to address, problems you'd like to solve.
Well, currently I've listened to the entire Sophie's World
Good for
section
you.
that you gave me.
Oh, okay.
And then I started to listen to the other parts off of YouTube, but I haven't finished the book yet.
Okay. What did you think of it? You've listened to some of that, right?
Yeah, let's do about
Okay,
15 minutes.
It's an odd choice, as I said before, because it's not originally in English. I like to choose things that are really sparklingly English. But it does contain a lot of interesting stuff. What are your thoughts on it?
Trying to think of adjectives to help describe it.
Adjectives are a good thing to have at your disposal.
It is a really interesting thing because it's teaching philosophy, but it's at a kid's level, and so it's really interesting.
Yeah.
Indeed, and it's a wonderful and unfortunately unique example of that.
It's not a very complex way of explaining.
Yeah.
No, and it needn't necessarily be complex. Philosophy often gets caught up in verbiage.
Yeah.
And some philosophers just went on and on playing with words more than playing with real ideas, I feel, but then that might be simply the opinion of somebody who didn't entirely grasp what they were talking about. nonetheless, I think he does a very fine job of choosing those things which are really significant and really particularly important, and not just the people that we necessarily regard as philosophers. You know, we've got Thales and Plato and Aristotle and Socrates and so forth, that we're starting out with the Greeks. But he also talks about some of the just major thoughts, Euclid, and the ideas that have been developed and had tremendous influence on the world. But the whole story itself, and we don't really discover this until later, is an example in a way of reality and unreality, in the sense that the story itself, written to Sophie is imaginary, and so is the philosopher, but it's written as a birthday present to the author's daughter, whose name is Hilda. And her name pops up from time to time in the story, and the story characters don't understand, who is this person Hilda who keeps on popping up in the story? It's a fascinating idea. And he does address that from a philosophical viewpoint. But in general, I think it treats the issues well. And it's fairly kind to religion, which an awful lot of modern scholastic writing tends not to be. So what do you feel? Should we read further in it, listen to further parts of it? There are many other things we can do as well when we bring up our agenda here.
Oh, by the end, by next week, I should have in a debate topic on sort of the main debate is whether we should have Medicare in the U.S., but then there's a bunch of other stuff in there too that I also put in. So I should have that up by next week.
Okay, well, that'll be wonderful. We'll take a look at that. That's sort of addressing the issue that we were discussing here. Well, actually, sort of tangentially, we're talking about the funding of NASA.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've put some thoughts into the funding of NASA. There are a lot of questions involved there. I think also when we get to talking about medicine.
Yeah. Well, I plan to touch on NASA in my essay.
Okay, well, we'll take a look at that and see where it goes. I'm not sure exactly how we're going to weave all of that together. Okay, I also threw this one at you, A Brief History of Time. Did you listen to some of that? What did you think?
I've actually been really interested in all of like cosmology in the past year, so I really enjoyed it. I skimmed over the book, like the first few chapters a couple of months ago, but I listened to it today, and I just, let's see.
All right, go ahead.
I enjoyed it because it gives, let's see, how do I word this? I just like the whole idea of how he talks about the Earth being the center of the universe and how Galileo helped disprove that, where the sun is the Earth revolves around the sun, and even though the sun isn't the center of the universe, how he was able to use the eclipse of the Earth and the Moon, looking at the shadow of the Earth on the Moon and how it was round, proved that the Earth had to be spherical and that we weren't on a flat plate in space. So I like those basic principles that he talked about in the beginning minutes and chapters. So
yeah, he's a fascinating character. Of course, not the only one, but certainly one of the bright lights in modern cosmology. And of course, fascinating life itself as well. And I'm sure you're aware that a biographical movie just came out recently.
Yes.
Have either of you had a chance to see that?
No, I haven't seen it.
There was an earlier one too, which was awfully well made, with Benedict Cumberbatch in the title role. And that one has been posted on YouTube in its entirety. And you might enjoy watching that. I came across something just recently. I think it was, yes, it was Connor who posted it. So we will have to address it next week in any case, because he's not here today. But he recommended this little video by Carl Sagan. And it's very short, and it's on the necessity to explore space and indeed to colonize space. However, in looking around online, I found this one was very good, but I found another one which is much more recent, Stephen Hawking on the future of space travel. Have you watched this one? I sent it out yesterday.
No.
Let's watch a little of it if you'd like.
I don't mind.
Let's take a look. I don't usually watch things in class, partly because I'm not sure what this machine is going to do to me. But I queued this up so that it skipped the three dignitaries. It starts with people introducing each other before they get down to anything. But Hawking is assisted by his daughter, Lucy Hawking, with whom he has authored a children's book, with the purpose of trying to persuade people to study science, especially young people to study science. Laudable concept, I think, but probably thoroughly misguided. Why do you think I might say that?
Well, I do remember in the introduction of The Brief History in Time, it was Sagan who helped write the book. Yeah, I think it was. I forget who
Wrote the introduction. It may well have been Sagan. Of course, I'm not sure when he died.
But he was saying how Hawking was, quote, trying to understand the mind of God, seemingly. So
that has certainly been said of Einstein, yeah. And indeed, I think it's really the answer to everything in Sophie's world, as well as everything in cosmology, is trying to understand that. Reading Einstein on God is a fascinating subject too. This is the question: can we understand what's really on? And maybe that's really the question: is can we understand it? Are we capable of understanding what the meaning behind things, and indeed the structure, the significance of it, where we stand, why we're here, where are we indeed, and what surrounds us? Let's see what he has to say here. I'm going to start it and then let it download for a while, because otherwise I think it's going to be very, it seems to be downloading fairly well. There's part that I think I'd like to forward to, if I can, and that may be really being terribly optimistic about our technology here. Mind you, much of this is fairly optimistic about technology. But perhaps even more so, I'm going to try skipping it forward to there.
This is important.
Okay, I will let it download a bit. What's important here is what Lucy Hawking says is she lays out the deplorable state of scientific understanding, the horrible state of education. And she's talking about in the UK. And of course, and then she turns around at the end and says, it's not much better in the US. I have difficulty believing how it could possibly, the US could possibly ever be better than the UK when it comes to education. But then one has such a skewed picture of education in the UK, I think. If you look at television, you look at television history and film, and you find that it is really rather dominated by Oxford and Cambridge graduates. All of the Pythons, Fry and Laurie, Rowan Atkinson, they're all highly educated. We don't seem to appreciate educated entertainers in this country very much, but over there they tend to dominate. And as a result, one tends to assume that somehow the British public are better educated than we. And apparently this is not the case. Let's see what she has to say about that.
For the US to be a leader in science education.
Oh.
So it all sounds rather gloomy, but there is hope. As I found out when I went on a worldwide schools lecture tour with a talk called Surfing the Solar System.
I'm going to back it further. This is too far forward.
Walk to any part of the known universe that you want.
People want to go into science. As a small step towards curing this, my daughter, Lucy, and I had written a children's book. I will now let Lucy talk about how to encourage the next generation to take an interest in space and in science generally.
Hello and good afternoon. I'm very, very honoured to be here at the NASA 50th birthday lecture series. It's a great honour to be here talking to you. You've heard my father telling you about why we need to travel into space. Well, I'd like to take just a few minutes to tell you why we think we need to have a next generation who wants to travel into space as well. As my father said, at the moment, we face a paradox. Never before have science and technology played such a big part in our lives. And yet, at the same time, it seems that children are turning away from science. They're losing interest in science, and they're not studying it. So I'd like to talk a bit about what we learned from children, what we learned about children and science education, and how NASA makes a great contribution to ensuring that the next generation does engage with science. Last year, my dad and I published a book for kids. It's an adventure story in which all the adventures are based on real science. It's about a little boy who lives next door to a scientist. And this scientist has an amazing computer called Cosmos. And Cosmos is so powerful and so intelligent, he can draw a doorway through which you can walk to any part of the known universe that you want to visit. Now, when I told some people at NASA about Cosmos, the fictional computer, they said, oh, I wish we had one of them because that would help our budget enormously. Now, my father wanted to work on this project because of his high level of concern about children and science education. Now, that's not saying that we set out to persuade every child to be a scientist, because our world needs people with a wide variety of skills. But science affects all of us, and it matters to all of us, and it will do even more so in the future. The children of today are the adults of tomorrow, and they need to have a basic understanding of science if they're going to make the kind of decisions that will affect us all. And we're going to need scientists as well, not just to work on space travel, but to work on issues that face us all, like climate change, or fuel sources, or food production. Now, some recent research has highlighted the fears about children and science education. In the United Kingdom, a recent survey found that a third of UK school children believe that wartime Prime Minister Winston Churchill was the first man to walk on the moon. I'm sorry about that. NASA, Neil Armstrong. And the statistics that came with this survey are not very heartening either. They found that 40% of children thought Mars was a chocolate bar. 35% of children said the Earth was not an official planet. And extraordinarily, 72% could not identify the moon from pictures. Now, just in case you're sitting there feeling smug, I'm afraid the results in the USA are really not looking much better. Only 4% of US adults, when asked, could name a living scientist who they would nominate as a science role model. Although, at the same time, 96%, a stunning 96% of US adults think that it is important for the US to be a leader in science education. So it all sounds like...
Let's just look at that for a moment. Of course, this is a scathing condemnation of education systems. Certainly here, and apparently also in the UK, the vast bulk of students don't know the most fundamental things about the world they live in and the cosmos they inhabit and our nearby neighbors, for example. How many role model scientists can you folks name?
Living ones, or?
Well, let's open it up to all of them, but there are certainly some good living ones.
There's, let's see.
This is one I have trouble with. So
The famous ones I know of, I've never really had a science role model because I'm not the biggest person on science. The famous ones we know of are Galileo. Obviously, there's Einstein and Stephen Hawking.
Mm-hmm.
There's, let's see.
isn't there a guy, I can't remember his last name. I don't even know if this is right, but isn't Roger something? Maybe.
Roger Penrose?
Yes.
Okay, yes, he's a rather important one. He's a scientist with whom Hawking has collaborated on a number of works and has done some remarkable things. Let me suggest a few others that you folks might appreciate, some of whom are very good speakers. And so they really might be worth listening to, although as scientists, they're not necessarily the philologists that I like to follow. But one is Michio Kaku. Has anybody heard of him? He's a Japanese American, or Japanese background. He was born here. And he is a cosmologist, but more specifically, he was directly involved in string theory and developing the fundamental equations of string theory. But he also speaks on many different subjects, and I think for the most part he makes a lot of sense. He knows what he's talking about, and that's a really significant thing. There's another one that whom I really would not recommend to you necessarily, because his language is rather miserable. And his name is Lawrence Krauss. He's also a cosmologist, yes, very interesting things to say, but it's interesting how people with that level of education can have so much trouble fumbling over themselves trying to get their grammar straight. And there's actually an example of him doing that in our other classroom, in which I think the line was so significant. It was said, Princeton asked Richard and I to have a conversation. The fact that Princeton asked them, and he can't figure out the fact that it should be Richard and me and not Richard and I, if you see my point. Anyway, there are a number of really prominent scientists. One of them, Neil deGrasse Tyson, you may have heard of. You heard of him? He made the new version of Cosmos, which was originally done by Carl Sagan, whom you mentioned earlier. Of course, he's not alive any longer, but Neil deGrasse Tyson has taken up the same program and sort of redone it based on more modern developments. Beautifully done program, not at all kind to religion, however. So I leave that up to you. Okay, I don't know that. Let's make sure that we do with your time what's best to be done with your time, and let's go back to our agenda here, if that's the best place to go. Otherwise, we will address whatever seems to be most appropriate. I thought it might be appropriate here to talk about the items on the agenda, the assignments, because you have had a chance. I'm so glad to hear that you've had a chance to listen to some of these. Brief history of time. Hawking does write well. He wields his language well, and the fact is, I don't know anybody who went to Cambridge who doesn't wield his language well, and so it's a good example there. Even if, well, it's read by a professional reader, of course. This one. Did any of you get a chance to look a little bit at the Western tradition?
I watched 15 minutes of the episode on Egypt, but I didn't have much time to do that.
Right.
I was
Okay.
about the same, about 10 minutes.
I became too wrapped up in Sophie's
Okay. Well, I'm
world.
glad you got a chance to look at it at all. It's a superb thing. I recommend taking it and downloading it, making an MP3 out of it, and playing it in the background while you're washing the dishes or vacuuming the carpet or whatever you happen to be doing that you can listen to something at the same time, for two reasons. One of which is the content is just superb. And for historical purposes, he covers all of the aspects of civilization. He covers the political history and the philosophical history and the art history and the architecture and the literature. He does a wonderful job of spanning all of it. And it's 52 episodes long, so I won't expect you to listen to the whole thing. But he starts with the beginnings of civilization in Egypt and goes all the way up to the present, or at least as present as he did this in the early 90s. Yeah, and he passed away a few years ago. But his language is also excellent. That was really what inspired me more than anything else when I listened to him, was that part of the time he is clearly reading from notes, much of the time he is not. And you can't tell the difference. You see him speaking at that podium and he's looking at his audience, and his language, his sentences, his constructs all weave together beautifully. And this is the kind of mastery of language that we in here would like to acquire. Because once you acquire that, once you can speak, you can sit down and write as fast as you can write, and it's going to come out well. You see what I mean? An awful lot of people, and I'm sure you're aware of this, do not speak the same language that they write. And they assume, and an awful lot of people still do assume, and this is an assumption that's widespread in educational circles, that it's acceptable to misuse language, to mangle language when spoken. But when you write, you're supposed to follow the rules. I'm sorry, but if you're used to mangling it, you're going to mangle it both ways. Or you're going to find it such an onerous and difficult task to try to do it in writing correctly, since that's not a natural language for you. You see my point? And so I think that for that reason, I like to listen to people like Weber, who incidentally, of course, is not originally an English speaker. I think I may have mentioned where he comes from. Did you notice his accent? He does have an accent.
I don't. I noticed the accent, but I can't
He'd
say
be
it.
still hard to pin it down. It really would.
Didn't you say it was from like I know it's from Europe somewhere, wasn't it like Romania or
You're
something?
absolutely right. He's Romanian originally. And you can hear that just coming through most of his accent. He's Oxford. He went to Oxford University. Again, like Cambridge, I don't know anyone who came from Oxford who doesn't wield language well. This is where it's done well. Even if poor Woodhouse never did actually get a chance to go to Oxford or Cambridge, he aspired to. And so let's move on and talk about Woodhouse. This is a book cover for the brinkmanship of Galahad Threepwood. One of my favorite of his books, and this is, there is nothing socially significant about anything Woodhouse ever wrote. It's just plain frivolity, but it's such eloquent frivolity. Absolutely wonderful. So I recommend listening to this. Did anybody get a chance to look at it?
No, I wanted to, but I
Okay.
didn't have a chance to.
I know it's hard. I mean, I give you what is it, 30 hours of reading or something like this. I can't expect you to do that much of it, but put it on a memory stick. Make an MP3 out of it and stick it in your phone, and then just use it anytime you feel like doing something utterly irrelevant, utterly frivolous, but you need to justify to your parents that you're doing something worthwhile. Stick this on in the background, and whether you intend it to or not, it will have its effect, and you'll start remembering what Aristotle said, and you see what I mean. Okay, Fellowship of the Ring. I asked everyone this time to try to read through to Lothlorien. Have we done that? And have you brought in some sections to share with us, right?
I was one page off from finishing.
Okay. Again, I like the audiobooks. Some people find that they can sit down and read much faster than they can listen.
Yeah, I
to
can
an
read
audiobook,
faster than the audiobook, which is why I do.
which is wonderful
Yeah.
if that works for you. I find if I'm reading, somehow I always get distracted and run out of steam. Whereas if I turn on an audiobook and it's going to go whether I want it to or not, I actually end up finishing a book that way. So it depends on your learning style. So it's nice to have both. Okay, was there anything in there that we wanted to revisit? Or perhaps even read?
I don't have any particular passage that I like to read, but I just like how Tom Bombadil, how he's essentially immune to the ring and its powers, and how he can be trusted with it. How he's basically like a nobody almost, but I mean, I don't know.
He could be, he's like the little god because he could be trusted with it, but his mind's so forgetful, he's going to go, whoops.
Yes, and Gandalf makes that very clear.
Yeah.
Doesn't he? It's been theorized that this pantheon that Tolkien created, we don't really understand how it worked exactly. We can assume that the Ishtari, which is what he called the wizards, of which there were originally 5, were probably of the same ilk as the Maiar, that is the lesser gods, which would include the Balrog and Sauron, and very probably Bombadil. So they were there was some kinship there in some sense. I'll tell you what, let's do exactly what we're talking about there and go back and find, okay, here we're at the Prancing Pony already. No, there we go, back there. This is, okay, here we're at the Prancing Pony. This is, I think it's delightful. There is a merry Odeon. But let's go back to Bombadil. I've got a little bit of Bombadil. They, at one point, they wake up and find that it's raining, and they are delighted. That means that they're going to be staying there for another day. Okay, I think here we're in Barrow, handling the Barrow Whites. Yeah, fog on the Barrow Downs. I could do a quick search, but okay, here's where they're sitting and talking with him. At last, Tom and Goldberry rose and cleared the table swiftly. The guests were commanded to sit quiet, and were set in chairs, each with a footstool to his tired feet. There was a fire in the wide hearth before them, and it was burning with a sweet smell, as if it were built of apple wood. When everything was set in order, all the lights in the room were put out, except one lamp and a pair of candles at each end of the chimney shelf. Then Goldberry came and stood before them, holding a candle, and she wished them each a good night and deep sleep. Have peace now, she said, until the morning. Heed no nightly noises, for nothing passes door and window here save moonlight and starlight and the wind off the hilltop. Now she passed out of the room with a glimmer and a rustle. The sound of her footsteps was like a stream falling gently away downhill over cool stones in the quiet night. It's nicely put together, isn't it? And of course, she does sound like a stream because she's the daughter of the river. Now, what that exactly means, we don't know, except that it's something immortal, apparently. Okay, Tom sat for a while beside him in silence, while each of them tried to muster the courage to ask one of the many questions he had meant to ask at supper. Sleep gathered on their eyelids. At last, Frodo spoke. Did you hear me calling, Master? Or was it just chance that brought you to at that moment? Tom stirred like a man shaken out of a pleasantry. Eh, what? Said he. Did I hear you calling? Nay, I did not hear. I was busy singing. Just chance brought me then, if chance you call it. It was no plan of mine, though I was waiting for you. We heard news of you, and learned that you were wandering. We guessed you'd come ere long down to the water. All paths lead down that way, down to the Withywindle. Old Grey Willow Man, he's a mighty singer, and it's hard for little folk to escape his cunning mazes. But Tom had an errand there that he dared not hinder. Tom nodded, as if sleep was taking him again, but he went on in a soft singing voice, and he sings one of his nonsense songs here. He fell silent again, but could not help asking one more question, the one he most desired to have answered. Tell us, Master. He said, what about the Willow Man? What is he? I've never heard of him before. No, don't, said Mary and Pippin together, sitting suddenly upright. Not now, not until the morning. Okay. It's wonderful material, and I find it's uncomfortable and ill-fitting, perhaps, to read it in American, but then perhaps it's just as ill-fitting to read it in an RP accent, because that's not what Tolkien himself used. Background being Birmingham. So, anyway, beautiful material there. Any thoughts? Any interesting? Any questions here? I'm thinking of the part. Okay, this is one of the things I liked so much about Tolkien's. He uses this device. I've seen this device used in many places, and that is, one writes about brilliant language without necessarily using that language. And so in this case, for example, he says, suddenly Tom's talk left the woods and went on leaping up the stream, over bubbling waterfalls, over pebbles and worn rocks, and among small flowers and close grass and wet crannies. Wandering at last up onto the downs, they heard of the great barrows, the green mounds and the stone rings upon the hills, and the hollows among the hills. Sheep were bleating in flocks, green walls and white walls rose. So here he's not giving you the words that were being used, he's describing them as though they were being used by somebody else. He does this a number of times, especially. Oh, interesting. There you go. Thank you. he does this a number of times, especially when the elves are singing, because of course that can't be rendered into common speech. It's so Empyrean, if you'd like, so beatific, so remarkable that he can't possibly describe it, but he does his best to describe it, but can't possibly emulate it. So it's an interesting device. I've seen this used elsewhere to great effect, I think. And then he's asked, "Who are you?" "A what?" said Tom, sitting up, his eyes glinting in the gloom. "Don't know my name yet?" That's the only answer. "Tell me, who are you, alone, yourself, and nameless? But you are young, and I am old, eldest. That's what I am. Mark my words, my friend. Tom was here before the river and the trees. Tom remembers the first raindrop and the first acorn. He made paths before the big people and saw the little people arriving. He was here before the kings and the graves and the Barrow-wights. When the elves passed westward, Tom was here already before the seas were bent. He knew the dark under the stars when it was fearless, before the dark lord came from outside." What dark lord is he talking about there?
Sauron, right? Or
I think here we're talking about Morgoth, or originally Melkor was his name, and he was a real god of the highest level, who was obviously a fallen angel, and he was cast out eventually, but Sauron was his henchman and ended up being the evil character with whom the later ages had to deal. Okay. Again, beautiful language. I'm not sure that we've necessarily justified what we're doing with it. Does anybody have any other parts that they wanted to visit? Okay. What are we doing for time here?
3:20.
yeah.
3:20. And you 3:40?
Yes.
Okay, great. We've got some time now. Okay, great. The questions here, I think, are going to arise next week, and I don't know the extent to which these issues appeal to you, but what one wants to do when preparing a debate is anticipate both arguments, and especially those of your opponent, and see if one can counter them, if not necessarily ahead of time, see if one can be prepared to counter them. There are a lot of different situations in which different devices are used in debate. And one of the ones that is apparently a big one is throw out so many facts so quickly, speaking as rapidly as possible, that your opponent simply hasn't got time to address them. And then whoever's keeping a record of this will end up presumably defaulting to your position simply because your opponent didn't have time for them. Doesn't seem to me to be a very ideal way to put it.
It's a really underhand way to win.
Yes, but nonetheless, it seems to be one of the tactics which is often employed. What are the arguments in favor of funding NASA, perhaps even overfunding it, or at least funding it beyond that which the experts here are demanding or suggesting?
The main ones I know are that let's see, what is it? Well, one of them is, well, we need to watch for asteroids, because if we don't, who's going to do it, and who's going to warn people when something's coming? But for the other things like space exploration and going to other places, other than the argument for colonizing or perhaps bringing back minerals from other places, don't really know anything to support NASA.
Okay. What did you think of the arguments that were presented here?
I didn't have a chance to watch it. How long is the
The
first
first
video?
one is very short. Shall we take a look at it?
We might as well.
Let's do that one. This is the one that Connor suggested. I think it's very good. It's what is it, about just over 3 minutes.
We were hunters and foragers. The frontier was everywhere. We were bounded only by the earth and the ocean and the sky. The open road still softly calls. Our little terraqueous globe is the madhouse of those 100,000 millions of worlds. We who cannot even put our own planetary home in order, riven with rivalries and hatreds, are we to venture out into space? By the time we're ready to settle even the nearest to other planetary systems, we will have changed. The simple passage of so many generations will have changed us. Necessity will have changed us. We're an adaptable species. It will not be we who reach Alpha Centauri and the other nearby stars. It will be a species very like us, but with more of our strengths and fewer of our weaknesses. More confident, far-seeing, capable, and prudent.
4, 3, 2.
For all our failings, despite our limitations and fallibilities, we humans are capable of greatness. What new wonders undreamt of in our time will we have wrought in another generation and another? How far will our nomadic species have wandered by the end of the next century and the next millennium? Our remote descendants, safely arrayed on many worlds through the solar system and beyond, will be unified by their common heritage, by their regard for their home planet, and by the knowledge that whatever other life may be, the only humans in all the universe come from Earth. They will gaze up and strain to find the blue dot in their skies. They will marvel at how vulnerable the repository of all our potential once was, how perilous our infancy, how humble our beginnings, how many rivers we had to cross before we found our way.
It is absolutely superb when you look at it and you think about it.
Mhm.
And he does a beautiful job with the language. Very nicely done. Of course, that would have been scripted, but
Yes.
still. It's terribly optimistic, don't you think?
It is. It's really, really optimistic.
In a way, it's optimistic in the same sense that Roddenberry created Star Trek to be optimistic. In the future, we'll be an enlightened species. No more war, no more racism and sexism and hatred. And you think we're ever going to transcend those?
No.
We're not doing a good job of it. In the lower video here, Hawking has a wonderful sense of humor. And he says a couple of remarkable things in there. To catch them if you can, see if you're going to understand. One of them is one of the strongest arguments for the existence of intelligent life out there in the universe is that they haven't chosen to talk to us. Think about that one a little bit. And then later on he says, what are the probabilities of life developing into intelligent life? And some people would say we still haven't done that. And I think he makes a very good point there. Sagan's conclusions are excellent, but they are very optimistic.
Yeah, in my opinion, the last 6,000 years we've been here, the only thing we've managed to do is find better ways of doing all of the same thing, better ways of transporting information, better ways of storing information, and better ways of killing each other too.
And oddly, we produced wonderful ways to educate everybody in the world, but somehow have managed not to do so.
We've managed to destroy the young system that was growing so well.
Well, I'm not sure that there was much of a system before, but if you look at Shakespeare's education, you got to conclude it was a hell of
Yeah,
a lot before.
our education is just going. Where did people at Shakespeare go?
Well, they had their little schools. Of course, the body of knowledge that existed at the time was much smaller than what it is now. But the fact is, you folks can pick up this device in front of you, which, by the way, is vastly more powerful than all of the computers that were used to get us to the moon. And you can look up anything from the entire history of literature and science and knowledge, and it's there at your disposal. And yet they can come up with statistical evidence that only 2%, that only 2% of the world or the population can name a scientist or can recognize the moon or can categorize the Earth.
I mean, you look at the Federalist Papers, newspaper from 200 years ago. They talk about all these people, Aristotle and Plato, like you're supposed to know what they are, but you read them and, well, I don't know that, I don't know that. But all the common farmers of the day knew it because it was just the daily newspaper article.
That's a very interesting point. Very good point.
It's common talk for them.
For them, all that was normal. For us,
of course, a great deal also. I'm not sure how much they really. The common man would necessarily know about the great Greek thinkers, but one thing they certainly knew was the Bible.
Yeah,
and this was what, for example, Thomas Paine used. Oh, what did Thomas Paine write?
He didn't write the Declaration of Independence, but he wrote. It was a book, or it was a book, right?
Well, it was pamphleteer. He wrote these short things, yes. And it influenced the Declaration of Independence greatly. Common Sense was the name of one of them, and then The Age of Enlightenment was the name of another. And he referred to something that he knew everyone would have read, and that was the Bible. So he makes a lot of biblical references throughout. I think that Thomas Paine's work is something that's well worthy of study, as is Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson, of course, is regarded as the primary author of the Declaration of Independence and a number of other things. And if you read that, you realize, oh my goodness, this is beautiful language. It's just superbly put together. And the kind of language that one so rarely hears used in our current world.
I think it's because majority of our founding fathers were educated and they knew like Latin and Greek, and they knew a variety of different languages that helped them that put more meaning behind, like even the Declaration of Independence, or I mean, on our dollar bill, it says, E pluribus unum, that they all took from what they learned. So I think that's what greatly helps them too in establishing.
They were educated, yes, indeed. And I'm afraid education, not just on the basic public school level, although that is abysmal, but even in higher education in this country tends to be rather dreadful in so many ways. For one thing, before getting to university in much of the world, certainly the European universities, one has to go through a fair amount of preparation. One ends up in Germany doing the Abitur, in England doing the exams. I'm trying to remember what they call them there, and they will have passed exams, which basically prepare them for higher education. I remember seeing people who had come out of our school system and were enrolling in university, who had to take everything over again because they really didn't know anything. They had to start again with remedial math and again with remedial language skills because they had never acquired those.
There's actually a website, I don't remember which college was made. They have an entire website or entire section of the website dedicated to remedial English for their applicants. Because so many college level applicants don't know basic English.
Yes. And I hate to say this, so many college instructors don't use reasonable English. I think every teacher should be a language teacher. Because if you have a teacher who's using language that you would not want a student to turn in on a paper, that teacher is doing that student a disservice. Unfortunately, so many of my colleagues at the college simply could not turn a phrase, could not put together two sentences intelligently. And that's, I mean, how can you possibly expect very much?
Yeah.
Especially when you have a largely immigrant population, they're expected to learn language in the classroom. So it's a terrible state, I think. But what is the solution? We seek out people who do use it well. And there are some, and that's really what I've done in the classroom here, or tried to do in the classroom, is give you a list of examples. And of course, the other classroom is far larger. But when we listen to Woodhouse or Weber or Stephen Sophie's world, is the fact is you'll find that most educated Scandinavians speak better English than Americans do. I'm serious about that. Fry's language, he just loves language and loves playing with it. This Planet Word program that he put together, it's not all out there on YouTube. It's been taken down, but it's an excellent thing, and I'd be able to dig it up for you if you'd like. Another speaker whom I have listened to with fascination many times is Christopher Hitchens. I can't say is, however, he died a couple of years ago. He's very unkind to religion, but his language is utterly superb. Just listening to him debate. He's written on many different subjects, and including anti-religion. And when he talked to his publishers, and he told them he wanted not just to do the usual book tour of the major cities, he wanted to be scheduled for debates through the Bible Belt, and did. And he debated in major parochial universities through the country. It's wonderful just to listen to both sides of it, so you understand what the issues are and how to put it. And another one that I enjoy particularly is Robert Fisk. He's a journalist. He's a superb journalist. But then again, how many journalists have a dozen doctorates? He's an educated journalist. We don't really have that very many of those in this country. So that's been my intent, is to try to weave these together. Rowan Atkinson, do you remember watching that? I think I assigned it this last semester.
I don't recall.
Okay.
I may have, and I just don't remember who he is.
Okay. Do you mind if we do you have something else you want to address before you have to leave?
No.
Okay, let's take a quick look at. I think you'll probably recognize him, and you'll know immediately that you've already seen it because I have assigned this. He's not one someone thinks of as being a great orator. After all, he's Mr. Bean. He does entire films without saying anything. But no, he's a graduate of Oxford University. He got his master's degree in electrical engineering, believe it or not, and he turns a phrase beautifully. He's let's give it a try. Where was he?
starting point when it comes to the consideration of any issue relating to free speech is my passionate belief that the second most precious thing in life is the right to express yourself freely. The most precious thing in life, I think, is food in your mouth. And the third most precious is a roof over your head. But a fixture for me in the number 2 slot is free expression, just below the need to sustain life itself. That is because I have enjoyed free expression in this country all my professional life and fully expect to continue to do so. Personally, I suspect highly unlikely to be arrested for whatever laws exist to contain free expression because of the undoubtedly privileged position that is afforded to those of a high public profile. So my concerns are less for myself and more for those more vulnerable because of their lower profile. Like the man arrested in Oxford for calling a police horse gay. Or the teenager arrested for calling the Church of Scientology a cult. Or the cafe owner arrested for displaying passages from the Bible on a TV screen. When I heard of some of these more ludicrous offences and charges, I remembered that I had been here before in a fictional context. I once did a show called Not the 9 O'Clock News some years ago, and we did a sketch where Griff Rhys-Jones played Constable Savage, a manifestly racist police officer to whom I, as his station commander, is giving a dressing down for arresting a black man on a whole string of ridiculous, trumped up and ludicrous charges. The charges for which Constable Savage arrested Mr. Winston Kudogo of 55 Mercer Road were these: walking on the cracks in the pavement, walking in a loud shirt in a built-up area during the hours of darkness, and one of my favorites, walking around all over the place. He was also arrested for urinating in a public convenience and looking at me in a funny way. Who would have thought that we would end up with a law that would allow life to imitate art so exactly? I read somewhere a defender of the status quo claiming that the fact that the gay horse case was dropped after the arrested man refused to pay the fine, and that the Scientology case was also dropped at some point during the court process, was proof that the law was working well, ignoring the fact that the only reason these cases were dropped was because of the publicity that they had attracted. The police sensed that ridicule was just around the corner and withdrew their actions. But what about the thousands of other cases that did not enjoy the oxygen of publicity, that weren't quite ludicrous enough to attract media attention? Even for those actions that were withdrawn, people were arrested, questioned, taken to court, and then released. That isn't a law working properly. That is censoriousness of the most intimidating kind, guaranteed to have, as Lord Dear says, a chilling effect on free expression and free protest. Parliament's Joint Committee on Human Rights summarised, as you may know, this whole issue very well by saying, while arresting a protester for using threatening or abusive speech may, depending on the circumstances, be a proportionate response, we do not think that language or behaviour that is merely insulting should ever be criminalised in this way. The clear problem with the outlawing of insult is that too many things can be interpreted as such. Criticism is easily construed as insult by certain parties. Ridicule easily construed as insult. Sarcasm, unfavourable comparison, merely stating an alternative point of view to the orthodoxy can be interpreted as insult. And because so many things can be interpreted as insult, it is hardly surprising that so many things have been, as the examples I talked about earlier show. Although the law under discussion has been on the statute book for over 25 years, it is in...
Anyway, you understand what I mean.
Yeah.
If you can stand up, and of course this is scripted, but if you can deliver something that well done, it has an immense impact. Okay, so you're going to be ready for a debate next week?
Yes.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, let's go debate NASA.
Have a good week, everyone. You want to watch the rest of this?
Might as well.
Indicative of a culture that has taken hold of the programs of successive governments, that with the reasonable and well-intentioned ambition to contain obnoxious elements in society, has created a society of an extraordinarily authoritarian and controlling nature. That is what you might call the new intolerance, a new but intense desire to gag uncomfortable voices of dissent. I am not intolerant, say many people, say many softly spoken, highly educated, liberal-minded people. I'm only intolerant of intolerance. And people tend to nod sagely and say, well, yes, wise words, and yet if you think about this supposedly inarguable statement for longer than 5 seconds, you realize that all it is advocating is the replacement of one kind of intolerance with another, which to me doesn't represent any kind of progress at all. Underlying prejudices, injustices, or resentments are not addressed by arresting people. They are addressed by the issues being aired, argued, and dealt with, preferably outside the legal process. For me, the best way to increase society's resistance to insulting or offensive speech is to allow a lot more of it. As with childhood diseases, you can better resist those germs to which you have been exposed. We need to build our immunity to taking offense so that we can deal with the issues that perfectly justified criticism can raise. Our priority should be to deal with the message, not the messenger. As President Obama said in an address to the United Nations only a month or so ago, laudable efforts to restrict speech can become a tool to silence critics or oppress minorities. The strongest weapon against hateful speech is not repression, it is more speech. And that's the essence of my thesis, more speech. If we want a robust society, we need more robust dialogue, and that must include the right to insult or to offend. And even if, as Lord Deere says, the freedom to be inoffensive is no freedom at all. The repeal of this word in this clause will be only a small step, but it will, I hope, be a critical one in what should be a longer-term project to pause and slowly rewind the creeping culture of censoriousness. It is a small skirmish of the battle, in my opinion, to deal with what Sir Salman Rushdie refers to as the outrage industry. Self-appointed arbiters of the public good, encouraging media-stoked outrage to which the police feel under terrible pressure to react. A newspaper rings up Scotland Yard. Someone has said something slightly insulting on Twitter about someone who we think a national treasure. What are you going to do about it? And the police panic and they scrabble around and then grasp the most inappropriate lifeline of all, Section 5 of the Public Order Act, that thing where you can arrest anybody for saying anything that might be construed by anyone else as insulting. They don't seem to need a real victim. They need only to make the judgment that somebody could have been offended if they had heard or read what has been said, the most ludicrous degree of latitude. The storms that surround Twitter and Facebook comment have raised some fascinating issues about free speech, which we haven't really yet come to terms with. Firstly, that we all have to take responsibility for what we say, which is quite a good lesson to learn. But secondly, we've learned how appallingly prickly and intolerant society has become of even the mildest adverse comment. The law should not be aiding and abetting this new intolerance. Free speech can only suffer if the law prevents us from dealing with its consequences. I offer my wholehearted support to the Reform Section 5 campaign. Thank you very much.
Brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely brilliant. It's one of the questions, of course, one has to ask is how many of the people listening to this have actually understood it? There are very few words in there that he actually used that are unusual. I imagine there are a number that a lot of Americans would stumble over, but censorious and orthodoxy and so forth are things that I think would be generally understood by those he was aiming it at. And for a non-speaker, I'm not sure you can really call him that, but he does an incredible job. I think that's the only example of real speech that I know of from Rowan Atkinson. I wish there were more. Brilliantly done. Any thoughts?
It's actually, though, it is very true what he says, which is we get so wrapped up on, oh, you're hurting somebody's feelings, that we censor everything, and then, well, now we're back to a non-free speech state.
Yeah. Right. You know, this has been addressed in a number of different environments. There is one long audio-only video, YouTube video. It just hasn't got any video with it, which I'm not sure I should recommend, but you might appreciate it. It's on blasphemy laws, or laws against blasphemy. And the interesting thing is the two speakers they have are Stephen Fry and Christopher Hitchens. And that's such an amazing combination. And Fry does a wonderful job. He does a remarkable job there. So if you feel like looking that up, you will see that the two of them have appeared on the same stage twice on things on YouTube. And in both cases, they're things whose subject matter may be likely to cause offense. And mind you, of course, they're talking about the right to cause offense. So I think about that if you want to look at them. Okay, let's go back to our agenda here. And did I, in fact, leave my agenda page? No, there we are. Okay. Okay, so do we need more?
I think we have enough, because we have Brief History of Time, the Western Tradition, the Woodhouse audiobooks. We have Sophie's World. I don't know how much of that has been heard by the rest of the class.
Yeah, it's about 3 hours.
And then,
I think it's more than that.
Which one, Sophie's World?
Well, the movie is about 2 hours or something. The book itself is a good deal more than that. It's 32 episodes.
Then we also have, no, I think we're good, because you have the speech and debate coming up too.
Exactly. We haven't really defined the subject of our debate.
I mean, we can start that, but I don't think we can do it well until next week.
No.
When Kyle comes in, because he's the one who is arguing for NASA, and so.
Right. Perhaps we should come up with another debate topic, though, so it is not just one. For one thing, I'm not sure that we're going to have a lot of counter arguments on that particular debate, the should we fund NASA debate. The big one that keeps on coming up is in cases where you have people suffering from malnutrition, people suffering from wars and so forth, might there not be more important causes than NASA? Mm-hmm. Isn't that somewhat frivolous, somewhat unnecessary, somewhat tangential, if you see my point?
Well, for me, all the topics we've discussed recently, the Medicare, the requirement of getting different vaccines, and the NASA funding, all of those tie into the same key thing for me, which is the issue of morality. Is it moral to take money from someone or force someone to do something they wouldn't do otherwise because you're the government and you can't?
Right.
So that's the key point I can use in a lot of different ones and then turn it different ways.
Well, one of the corollaries to that question is, does the majority have a right to pass a law that would restrict the ability of the minority?
I've studied on that before, which is Majority rule doesn't make it good. Just because a majority says it's okay for serial killers to run around doesn't make it okay. So majority rule is good, but just because a majority says something doesn't mean it should always be done.
And where should that line be drawn? Where should the majority not be able to step?
Well, for me, because I'm very for limited government, it would be basically anywhere that interferes with people's rights, anywhere that interferes with a person's freedom. So taking money from someone to put it into Social Security would be something against, would be taking a right, because you're taking my money and putting it into some government fund that if I want to build my own retirement savings, which is what it's supposed to be, then I would do it on my own account and I wouldn't have to have the government force me to do it.
Okay, that's an interesting argument. Where do you stand regarding taxation for purposes of defense?
I do believe we need a military and a police force, because without that, we just go into an anarchistic state where whoever has the best guns or the most followers wins. So we do need a military, we do need a police force, but the military, we overuse it. We should use it when there's a clear threat, but the whole terrorist thing we've been doing for the last couple of decades is so iffy. We send in all these troops and we do all these things, and are we helping other countries? Supposedly we are, but the last time we tried to do that, we collapsed their government and got a worse terrorist organization in there. So I would personally say, unless there's a clear threat to us, we just pull out everyone who's fighting in the Middle East.
What do you say to people who bring up the argument that those who oppose us, those who are trying to generate support for opposition movements, ISIS, for example, and so forth, applaud when we go off and do something stupid, when we send drones over a country and it kills children and so forth. This is an argument that's been brought up, and the corollary there is really, are we not, by doing that kind of thing, really playing into the hands of those people we purport to be opposing?
And even if we, one of the biggest things that we are supposed to be opposing is we're putting in a better government for them. But the thing is, both logically and ideologically, neither of them works. Ideologically, we're not the world's police force. We can't fix every country in the world, because if we do, we'll never be done and we'll be in endless debt. And then logically, if some country came into the US and they said, here's how you're going to run your government, stayed for a decade and then left, we're just going to go back to the way we want to run our government, the way we're used to. We're not going to follow someone because we were made to. We're going to build a government the way we're used to it. So we send people in the Middle East, we have them fight, we have them make these better governments. But like Robert Fisk said from that one military letter, it's a shell. As soon as we leave, it's going to collapse and go back to what it was.
They will become what they were before. Yes, very, very good point. And that was so nicely put. You're doing very well. There are so many interesting issues there to consider and to think of, because one of the questions is, of course, do we have the moral high ground? Have we established standards and lived up to them that we think and that deserve necessarily to be sanctioned that way? One of the problems is, if we look at it in a symmetrical form, we have managed to impose our laws upon the world. But what if we were to look at that happening the other way around? For example, we go off and manage to execute, or in some cases apprehend and bring back people who have broken our laws but have never set foot in our country, have never really subjected themselves to our legal system. What if it were possible to change a little bit and we found the same tactics were being exercised by, for example, the Chinese government or the Saudi Arabian government, where it's illegal, for example, for women to drive a car.
Mhm.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And should we have the right to impose that our set of values upon everyone else? One of the biggest problems is the internet.
Mhm.
You say something on the internet that is blasphemous. Well, it's not necessarily happening now, but if we assume that we have the right to restrict what is going on the internet, as we have, for example, with WikiLeaks,
Mhm.
what if in the future we find that those powers reside with some other force that will regard anything we say as blasphemous,
Yeah.
for example?
I mean, I do believe that each country should have its own set of laws and they shouldn't be able to use it outside. Now, if someone like commits a crime here and then runs away, we can send them back, but they commit a crime somewhere else, that's not our business because they're not under our set of laws.
Well, it's becoming a tricky one. It's perfectly possible to run a con scheme on the internet and never enter the country whose denizens you're conning, if you see what I mean. So it's become
It is a
difficult to draw
harder
lines.
thing because of the internet.
Yeah.
You can't just draw land boundaries because the internet breaks all of those. So it does make it harder, but, well, I don't know.
It's amazing how rapidly things are changing.
Mhm.
And how much really is going to have to be addressed.
Yeah.
The internet is the most wonderful thing in the world for education. Has an education?
I think it has in some ways because homeschool is now so much easier. Parents that couldn't homeschool, now they say, here's what my parents do. They don't have the time to sit there and teach me from 100 textbooks, but they give me an online curriculum that's all video based, and then they send me there.
Right. But still, that's not so far from traditional school in a way.
Well, it is a different curriculum because
It
you
is.
get to build it your own.
Yeah.
It's not just here's the list, you have to do it this way.
Right. No, it's the resources are there. And for homeschoolers, you've been taking advantage of it.
Yeah.
You look around at most school kids, and that's not what's happening.
They take advantage of enough resources to get the good grade, and that's it.
I don't think they even get the good grades.
Oh, sure.
My wife was looking with despair at the papers that come in, and she's got less than 30 for class, 30%. That's
The sad thing is, though, that so many times the school system screws over the teacher. I read this one article, the teacher wanted the kids to succeed. She was an English teacher. And while it wasn't an easy class, it wasn't impossible. You did have to work, you did have to think, but it was a good class. And she didn't just offer free extra credit, like you bring a tissue box and you get extra credit, like some teachers do. But she did offer you a chance if you failed a test or whatever. And she was doing really well, but in the public school system, the principal called her and he said, you can't do this because you know what? There's a couple kids in your class that are failing. Well, that's because they don't try. I can't make them try. Fix it. And so she was forced to make the class one of those pointless classes where you do a stupid assignment, you bring in a tissue box, and you get an A+. Because if she had someone failing, she had to make it easier because she was too hard.
Yeah.
And so she can't even teach well in public school. You can't.
That's so universal.
Especially with Common Core now.
Yeah. No, it's a dreadful thing when you have to slow it down so that the slowest kid can get through.
Mm-hmm.
What does that do to everyone else?
Yeah, everyone else is sitting there just rotting their brain because that one kid in class doesn't want to try.
Right. Now that's very good point.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what I'm writing about right now. Okay, well, I won't add any more to our list here unless something really cogent and compelling
Comes up.
arises, which it very well could.
And then, are we going to read farther or just leave it as we are now?
I think we'll probably leave it. Well, go ahead and finish the book if you feel like
Yeah.
it. But we'll probably have to discuss all of this next time anyway.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Okay, well, let's bring this to a conclusion. It's the end of our college prep English class for homeschoolers this week. Signing off.